fire. In the Second World War, it was not merely an element. It was a weapon, a language of terror and survival. Among the hedgerows of Normandy, British armour rolled forward carrying something new, a tank whose gun did not throw shells but flame. The Churchill Crocodile began as a question few dared ask. Could fire be made disciplined? Could it be directed like artillery, engineered like any other machine of war? The answer would arrive in a roar that seared earth and memory alike. Its crews called it heavy, temperamental, and magnificent. Its enemies called it hell on tracks, and history would remember it as the weapon that made bunkers melt and courage falter. A British creation born of necessity, dread, and extraordinary design. By 1940, Britain stood alone, and the battlefields of Europe were changing. Stone walls and steel doors, not open fields, defined the new front. The German army had perfected the art of fortification, concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, and pillboxes that turned every village into a fortress. For the British infantry, it was a problem no rifle could solve. The Bren gun rattled, the mortar thudded, yet enemy positions remained intact. Each advance ended the same way, flame and smoke rising from the defenders, but only after tremendous loss. Military engineers watched and learned. At the Directorate of Tank Design, the conclusion was unavoidable. The war would demand a weapon capable not only of striking armour, but of clearing men from the most stubborn defences. Flame had already been tested by both sides, primitive projectors carried by men, limited in range, fatal when hit. What was required now was protection, endurance, and reach. The Churchill tank, with its thick hide and calm rolling pace, offered a canvas. Its wide tracks spread weight evenly. Its hull was a fortress in itself. Where lighter vehicles bogged down, the Churchill pressed forward. It was slow, but it arrived, and sometimes that was all the infantry needed. By 1942, reports from Dieppe and the desert made it clear. The British Army required an assault vehicle that could advance under fire, destroy fixed positions, and inspire terror in those who resisted. It would not be elegant, it would not be subtle, but it would have to work. Thus was born the concept of the Crocodile, an adaptation of the existing Churchill design fitted with a flamethrower in place of the hull machine gun. The idea was bold: replace bullets with a jet of burning liquid projected across 50, 60, even 80 yards. The sight alone would break defenders. But even as the idea formed, there was scepticism in London and silence in the ranks. Flamethrowers were old, cruel weapons, a relic of trench warfare. They had earned fear not only from those who faced them, but from those who carried them. Could such an instrument be trusted to machinery? Could British soldiers, men raised on the codes of professionalism and restraint, be asked to wield fire? At the War Office, the answer was coldly rational. War was not a moral contest, it was a mechanical one. If the Germans built fortresses, Britain would build the tool to burn them down. Through this pragmatic lens, the Crocodile took form in theory before it existed in metal, a solution to a problem of engineering, not ethics. In the workshops of Vauxhall Motors and the Royal Engineers, drawings began to appear, sketches of pumps, trailers, hoses, valves. A weapon was being imagined that would take the ancient torch and give it an engine. For the men who would later ride inside it, the promise was simple: no more futile charges, no more blind assaults against stone. The next time they faced a bunker, the bunker would burn first. Every invention in wartime begins with a vision, a union of desperation and method. The Churchill Crocodile's genesis belonged not to a single man, but to an institution, the British Directorate of Tank Design, and within it a handful of engineers who believed that any mechanical principle could be tamed with patience and pipework. In 1942, as the ruins of Dieppe still smouldered, Major General Percy Hobart, commander of the 79th Armoured Division, began rethinking the tank as an adaptable tool, not just a gun platform. His funnies, as the press would later call them, included bridge layers, mine clearers, and engineering variants built from the reliable Churchill chassis. Among them, one idea stood apart: a machine that could breathe fire. Hobart's vision was pragmatic rather than theatrical. The flame projector was not a spectacle. It was an engineering response to the problem of entrenched defence. Where artillery failed to find its mark and infantry suffered in the open, the Crocodile would crawl forward and, with a single burst, flush a bunker like a chimney. Yet the challenges were profound. The system had to deliver pressurized flame without endangering the crew, store fuel externally without exposing it to enemy fire, and connect it all to a tank already packed with armour, hydraulics, and ammunition. Engineers turned to Vauxhall Motors, manufacturers of the Churchill. In their Luton design offices, draftsmen laid out the idea: a trailer, armoured, towed behind the tank, carrying a reservoir of thickened fuel and compressed gas. This trailer would feed the flame gun through a flexible pipe running beneath the tank's hull, a line of fire literally beneath the crew's feet. The concept was radical, but precise. The projector, mounted in the Churchill's hull, replaced the usual machine gun. A pump forced the mixture, a blend of petrol and oil, along the pipe, where it met nitrogen gas and was expelled as a stream of burning liquid. A spark igniter at the nozzle ensured ignition at the moment of discharge, turning pressure into flame. The early diagrams were functional, almost clinical. No artistry, only flow rates and valve pressures. Yet behind the numbers lay something elemental: the reintroduction of fear into mechanical war. For centuries, armies had understood that fire could break morale as surely as bullets. The Crocodile's designers harnessed that psychology deliberately. Still, it was not meant for indiscriminate use. The Crocodile was to be deployed alongside infantry, supporting assaults against fortified points, not sweeping fields or cities. Hobart's division trained its crews in restraint. The weapon would be terrifying enough without misuse. To the men of the Royal Engineers, this was both science and sin. The transformation of an ancient weapon into a pressurized equation. A single trailer carried 400 gallons of fuel. Under ideal conditions, it could deliver 80 one-second bursts. Each burst was a sentence in the new language of mechanized siegecraft. The engineers named it, with gallows humour, Crocodile, cold-blooded, slow and deadly when provoked. Its outline, they said, would make the enemy think twice about digging in, and soon it would do more than that. It would make them surrender before the first shot was fired. The workshop is where theory becomes weight, rivets bite steel, and blueprints become a machine that will carry a crew into danger. For the Crocodile, this was a labour of compromise. Space surrendered to function, simplicity traded for survivability. At Vauxhall and in the Royal Engineer Yards, men accustomed to fitting axles and armour plates learnt a new vocabulary of pumps, seals and flexible piping. The Churchill's broad frame offered advantages and limits. Its armour and suspension could shoulder the extra burden. Its narrow fighting compartment could not. The designers solved this not by reworking the hull, but by extending the system outward, the trailer. The armoured trailer was an engineering answer in miniature. It had to be resilient under fire, sealed against sparks, and yet light enough to be towed without crippling the Churchill's mobility. Built from plate and internal bracing, it carried the Crocodile's lifeblood, several hundred gallons of a thickened fuel mixture, and a bank of compressed gas cylinders for pressure. Men in overalls bolted compartments, fitted valves, and tested seals until even the smallest leak became intolerable. The flame projector itself was compact but exacting. Where others had bolted a simple projector to a hull, the Crocodile's nozzle assembly was treated as an instrument, balanced, adjustable, with a firing tube set to cope with the punishment of dust, recoil, and heat. An ignition circuit and a reserve battery were fitted so that the crew could rely upon a spark the moment the trigger was pulled. In the machine shop, the nozzle's metal gleamed. Its bore was honed with the same diligence as a gun's. A practical difficulty was the pipe link. A length of hose had to pass from the trailer, under the tank, to the projector at the front. The hose needed to be flexible but protected, capable of resisting bullets and crushing. Designers clipped it beneath the Churchill's belly, shielded by skirting plates. Each coupling was tested with pressure gauges until the men were satisfied that the line could deliver fuel at the required rate without rupture. Inside the hull, space was reorganized. The Crocodile's loader and commander had less room. The radio set shifted. Ammunition racks were adjusted to make place for projector controls and the firing mechanism. Training manuals emphasized discipline. The crew must treat the fuel system as a vital organ, checking clamps and bleed valves with the same ritual care they applied to their turret breech. Trials in the yards were small and telling. A test team would bring the vehicle to a proving ground, connect the trailer, and warm the engine for a short march. Then, with observers at a calculated distance, the crew would initiate a timed burst. The result was immediate, mechanical, and appalling in equal measure, a lancing cone of flame, a heat wash that scorched the shelving behind the target. Engineers took notes on pressure drops, on burn duration, on nozzle wear. Incremental improvements followed: a stiffer spring here, a larger gauge there, a relayed valve to vent excess gas safely. Manufacture became a ledger of modest innovations rather than grand inventions. A more durable hose coupling saved hours of field repairs. A redesigned trailer brake meant the Crocodile would not swing wildly on rough ground. A change to the fuel thickener reduced clogging in cold weather. Each small fix improved survivability and confidence. Crucially, the men who built these tanks were not remote technicians. Many were veterans, mechanics who had seen the front and returned to work with a steadier hand. Their experience translated into practical choices: stronger handholds for crews climbing into and out of wet mud, better drainage in the trailer, and shielding where a hose might chafe. These were the small mercies of industrial compassion. When factory gates closed and a completed Crocodile rolled out, it bore the marks of that labour: welded seams, replaced rivets, the neat mounting of a projector in place of a machine gun, familiar features made strange by function. It was recognisably a Churchill, yet different in intent, less a platform for shellfire than a specialised tool of assault. And yet, even as the last nut was tightened, the machine remained an experiment. No matter how exact the drawings, most lessons would be learned under shell-scarred skies, in the field, where dust clogged, where men panicked, and where the ingenuity of the workshop would be measured against the chaos of battle. Before the Crocodile could enter war, it had to prove that its menace was more than theatrical. On a proving ground in southern England, under the cautious eyes of officers from the 79th Armoured Division, a line of targets was prepared: wooden bunkers, earth mounds, steel plates. A Churchill, newly converted, sat rumbling on the perimeter. Its trailer glinted behind, half armour, half alchemy. The first test was procedural. The engine idled at standard revolutions. Pressure was built in the nitrogen cylinders. Valves were opened one by one in a measured sequence. A quiet hiss, then ignition. From the bow of the tank, a bright cone erupted, pure orange at its heart, yellow at its fringe. The stream struck the mock bunker with a hiss that became a roar. Observers shielded their faces. The fuel mixture clung to every surface it touched, rolling and sliding like liquid metal. When it ended, the structure had ceased to exist as timber. It was a cinder framed by molten nails. A major took notes without expression. Effective. Range adequate. Recommend further control trials. The tests multiplied. Distance, elevation, burst length. Each variable mapped. Engineers discovered that a 1-second discharge used roughly 5 gallons of fuel, producing a plume 50 to 60 yards long. At maximum pressure, it could reach 80 yards, but control wavered. The flame guttered in the crosswind. Crews learned economy. Short, sudden bursts achieved more than prolonged streams. Then came the endurance runs. Tanks were driven across rutted tracks, through shallow water, and over obstacles. The trailer bucked and swayed, but held. Not a drop leaked. Men in heavy overalls checked joints and couplings after each circuit. They found soot, not flame. It was a victory of engineering more than drama. Yet the machine remained unpredictable. When the engine revs dropped too low, the pump faltered. If the pressure exceeded tolerance, backfire threatened the nozzle. The testing crews began to treat the Crocodile less like a tank and more like a volatile companion. They learned to feel its moods: the delay before a burst, the tremor of the pump when the system grew too hot. One sergeant, after a week of trials, described it simply: "It's alive when it fires. You feel it pull the air from the world." His words spread through the division. The Crocodile had gained a kind of legend before it had seen the enemy. To integrate it into battle tactics, exercises were staged with infantry support. Platoons advanced behind the tank, watching as it loosed flame upon mock pillboxes. The psychological effect was immediate, even among allies. The men following instinctively slowed, their eyes drawn to the roaring mouth of the machine ahead. No one wanted to be too near it. Reports sent to command recorded both success and discomfort. The weapon achieved its objectives precisely, but its use demanded nerves of iron. Crews wore flame-proof gloves, face shields, and sometimes scarves to shield against the reflected heat. The smell of burned earth lingered long after firing ceased. From these exercises, procedures were codified. Each Crocodile was to operate within a combined arms assault, with engineers and riflemen coordinated to exploit breaches in the enemy line. The flame tank's role was brief but decisive: a few seconds of fire to open a path where shells had failed. By late 1943, the weapon was formally accepted for service. Its designation: Churchill Crocodile, Flamethrower Tank, Mark 7. Crews trained quietly, far from the public eye. No newsreel trumpeted its creation, no posters celebrated it. It was not that kind of weapon. The final trials, held on a cold morning in Wiltshire, sealed its reputation. A camera unit filmed one of the last tests: a single burst illuminating mist, a sheet of living fire crossing the field. The officer in charge turned away before it reached the target. He didn't need to watch the result. The Crocodile had passed its test. Its real examination would come soon, on the coasts of Normandy, where concrete waited, and flame would speak for the first time in war's new tongue. The Churchill Crocodile made its debut not in theory, but in fire and fear. It was June 1944. The Normandy landings had begun, and the fields of France were thick with mud, hedgerows, and enemy resistance. Pillboxes dotted the countryside like seeds of concrete. Each one could hold up an entire battalion. Against such defences, even the most determined infantry often bled for yards at a time. That was when the Crocodile came into its own. As part of Hobart's 79th Armoured Division, the Crocodiles rolled off landing craft and onto the beaches behind the first waves. Their role was immediate: to break the strong points that machine guns and mortars could not silence. Eyewitnesses from the 141st Regiment Royal Armoured Corps recalled the first encounter. A German bunker resisted shellfire near Caen. The Crocodile advanced methodically, its trailer bumping across shell holes. At 50 yards, the projector flared. A burst of liquid fire arced through the air, slammed into the aperture of the bunker, and vanished inside. Moments later, white smoke poured out. Then came the silence, that strange, heavy silence that followed every use of the weapon. When the infantry moved in, they found the position abandoned. Those who had survived the first burst had fled, hands high, their faces grey with soot and terror. The effect was as psychological as it was physical. German reports later noted the Crocodile by name, warning troops to withdraw from contact when one appeared. A single burst could clear a building faster than a platoon of riflemen. But the weapon had its costs. It was slow, awkward in city streets, and vulnerable when the trailer was struck by artillery. The fuel tank was well armoured, yet a direct hit could still rupture it. The crews learned to reverse quickly to avoid exposing the rear. During the advance into northern France, Crocodiles were used repeatedly to clear defensive lines. At Le Havre, Boulogne, and Calais, they worked with sappers and infantry in careful coordination, a symphony of destruction performed with dreadful precision. Each operation followed a grim rhythm, artillery softening the line, crocodiles burning the strong points, engineers clearing what remained. There were failures too. Mud could trap the heavy Churchills, and once immobilized, a crocodile was as helpless as its prey. Crews sometimes destroyed their own trailers to prevent capture. In Italy, where terrain was steep and visibility limited, the tanks struggled to reach targets without exposing themselves. But even there, the flame projector proved decisive against caves and stone defences. One field officer described the experience in his diary. "Men fear the tank that burns. You can hear it before you see it, the hiss, the sudden roar, the world going white." The Crocodile's greatest triumph came not from technical perfection, but from the collapse of enemy will. When used, German soldiers often surrendered en masse. Some simply refused to fight when they learned crocodiles were in the sector. It was not efficiency that defined the machine. It was inevitability. And yet, the men who operated it carried their own burden. They seldom spoke of the weapon's effect, and they knew they were targets of special hatred. Captured crocodile crews could expect little mercy. The flamethrower was considered by many to be beyond the pale of soldiering. Still, they served. They saw the crocodile for what it was, a means to end stalemate, a tool that forced the enemy to yield faster and spared infantry long and bloody assaults. It was ugly, but in the brutal logic of 1944, ugliness was often mercy in disguise. By the winter of that year, Allied commanders knew they had something rare, a weapon that needed no propaganda. The crocodile's mere presence changed battle plans, and so it continued across France, into Belgium, and then into Germany itself, the flame cutting a path through the fortresses of the West Wall. Its record was not perfect, it was not immortal. But on the day it first turned its flame upon an enemy bunker, it had justified its creation. The crocodile had succeeded, and in succeeding had become one of the most feared machines of the Second World War. Victory carries shadows. The crocodile's effectiveness on the battlefield was beyond question, but it left behind an unease that no statistics could measure. To the men who built and operated it, the machine symbolized ingenuity. To those who faced it, it represented terror in its purest form. When word of the crocodile's actions reached Germany, the reaction was not tactical, but moral. Propaganda units denounced its use as barbaric, a violation of the soldiers' code. Yet the Wehrmacht employed its own flamethrowers freely, a contradiction that spoke less of principle than of wounded pride. For the British, this paradox was harder to confront. In the quiet between battles, officers and crews alike reflected on what they carried. Some described the Crocodile as a savage necessity, a weapon that shortened fights but left a mark on conscience. Others saw it as a bridge between eras, the last expression of primitive fear in an increasingly mechanical war. Officially, the Crocodile was treated like any other piece of equipment, subject to supply, maintenance, and logistical calculation. But within the ranks of the 79th Armoured Division, it was spoken of differently. Crews gave their vehicles names not of glory, but of irony. Creeper, Tame Flame, Little Lizzie. It was humour as insulation, an old British remedy for the unbearable. The hidden consequence was not only emotional, the use of flame weapons provoked retaliation. German soldiers, encountering a crocodile, were known to aim deliberately for its trailer. If captured, its crews faced execution, an unspoken rule in that brutal calculus of fear. This knowledge shaped behaviour. Crews travelled together, slept near their tanks, and moved in convoy when possible. The bond between man and machine grew stronger, not out of affection, but out of shared peril. Beyond the battlefield, the Crocodile forced new thinking about the ethics of weaponry. Reports from liberated towns recorded the devastation left in its wake. Scorched buildings, burned-out defences, walls blackened but still standing. Civilians often mistook the results for indiscriminate destruction, unaware that each burst had been aimed with methodical precision. After the war, some of those who had commanded Crocodiles testified to their tactical value. Fewer infantry casualties, shorter assaults, faster victories. But when asked if they would use such a weapon again, most hesitated before answering. Progress, it seemed, was a word that lost clarity in the light of flame. In Whitehall, the Crocodile's existence prompted a quiet debate among engineers and strategists. If the war had justified the use of fire against fortifications, what would peace demand of such machines? Could they be adapted, or should they be erased from inventory before conscience caught up with history? By 1946, many were placed in storage. A few were sent abroad for trials. Others were quietly scrapped, their trailers detached, their fuel systems drained. The technical success had produced a moral residue, one that Britain, victorious yet weary, preferred not to examine too closely. Still, the Crocodile left a mark that could not be smelted away. In engineering circles, its systems influenced future designs for controlled fuel delivery and pressure management. In doctrine, it proved that psychological warfare could be mechanized. And in memory, it became both symbol and warning, proof that even the most disciplined army, given cause enough, will turn to the oldest weapon of all. When the guns fell silent in 1945, Europe was a continent of ruins, and among the many machines left standing in its fields were the Churchills. Some bore the scars of ordinary battle, others carried the distinctive fittings of the Crocodile. Their trailers, emptied of fuel, sat like discarded carapaces on the verges of Normandy roads. To passing soldiers, they looked less like weapons than husks, useful once, now mute. Yet, even as armies demobilized, the Crocodile refused to vanish entirely. Its reputation as the flame tank ensured its place in post-war inventories. The British Army kept several in active service for years, particularly within training schools and the newly formed Royal Armoured Corps demonstration units. In peacetime, the Crocodile's purpose shifted from fear to study. At establishments like Bovington and Lulworth, instructors used it to teach the principles of assault engineering, coordination, pressure systems, and crew discipline. The tank's ungainly trailer became an object of fascination for new generations of officers who had grown up on stories of its ferocity. The Cold War, with its new emphasis on nuclear and chemical warfare, made the flamethrower seem both obsolete and primitive, yet its underlying concept, controlled projection of energy lived on in entirely new technologies. Designers studying flamethrower systems later adapted similar pumping mechanisms for fuel-air explosives and jet-assisted de-icing. In a quiet way, the Crocodile had helped refine the science of pressure and ignition. Museums soon recognized its cultural gravity. In Normandy, one example was preserved at the Musée Mémorial de la Bataille de Normandie, its hull still carrying the original projector. At Bovington, another stood under careful restoration, the paint renewed, but the scorch marks left visible by choice. Visitors often remarked on the contrast between the crocodile's shape, slow, solid, dignified, and the violence it once contained. In Canada, a Churchill displayed in Calgary carried similar fittings, a reminder of the Commonwealth's shared engineering legacy. Elsewhere, veterans' associations petitioned for monuments to the 79th Armoured Division. Their argument was not pride, but remembrance, that the machines which fought for them, however terrible their method, had saved thousands of lives by ending fights swiftly. By the late 1950s, the last Crocodiles were retired from the British inventory. Their trailers were scrapped or detached, leaving the tanks themselves to be converted back to conventional roles or handed to museums. A few were tested by foreign armies. Others, their secrets already outmoded, were quietly forgotten. But legacy is not only what survives in steel. The Crocodile altered military thinking in subtler ways. It demonstrated the value of fear as a force multiplier, that the will to resist could be dissolved not by bombardment, but by expectation. Commanders studying post-war combat psychology cited the Crocodile's effect on morale as one of the earliest modern examples of mechanized intimidation. In Britain, it occupied an ambiguous corner of memory. It had served honourably, but uneasily, never paraded, never romanticized. Its crews were veterans without spectacle, their achievements buried within operational reports rather than victory speeches. And yet, when modern historians trace the lineage of British engineering in the Second World War, from radar to jet propulsion to amphibious armour, the Crocodile is always there, a reminder that progress is not always graceful, and that necessity, not ambition, is the true mother of invention. Today, the surviving examples stand quietly under museum lights, paint dulled by time, their trailers locked shut. No smoke, no roar, only the whisper of visitors reading the placard. The Crocodile endures not as a weapon, but as a question. How far will civilization go when pressed against the wall? In the museums and memorials where the Crocodile now rests, visitors often pause longer than they expect. There are tanks that inspire admiration, the sleek, the fast, the victorious, but the Crocodile inspires reflection. It does not hide what it was. The projecting nozzle at its bow tells its story before the guide can. Children point, veterans nod, and somewhere in that quiet exchange between curiosity and memory lies the truth of its legacy. The Crocodile was born from one of war's oldest dilemmas: how to overcome the immovable, how to make the defended yield. It answered with fire, and in doing so reminded humanity that progress and horror often travel the same road. For the engineers who designed it, the machine represented mastery of pressure, combustion, and control. For its crews, it represented endurance and exposure. And for those who watched from the bunkers it attacked, it represented the moment when courage failed and survival took its place. The gun at its nose, a barrel without bullets, remains one of the strangest symbols of 20th century warfare. It was both familiar and alien, a tool of siegecraft refined into modern machinery. The metal is ordinary, but the idea within it, that fear can be engineered, is what history remembers. In the archives of the Royal Engineers, there is a note written after the war by an unnamed officer. Fire, when disciplined, is civilization. When loosed, it is ruin. The Crocodile stood between the two. It is as close as any document comes to an epitaph. Outside Bayeux, one surviving crocodile sits near a field once blackened by its kin. Grass grows through its tracks, birds nest in its turret. The air carries no trace of smoke, only the soft hum of passing cars. Time has absorbed the heat, and yet, beneath its rivets, the record endures, of men who built a machine to fight walls, who faced walls of their own, and who proved that even in mechanized war the most dangerous weapon is imagination itself. The Churchill Crocodile was not the largest, nor the fastest, nor the most celebrated tank of the war. But it was perhaps the most human, a machine built to wield terror and then to live with the knowledge of it. In that paradox lies its final legacy, not flame, not steel, but conscience forged in armour. And like all machines that changed history, it leaves behind a question rather than an answer. What will the next generation invent, and what will it dare to burn?